The parking lot was empty, just cold concrete, dead streetlights, and one car that had no business being there at 2 a.m. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter and stopped walking. He recognized that car. Black, sleek, the kind of car that said I am in charge without making a sound. It belonged to Diana Cho, his boss, the CEO of Harlow & Associates, the woman who ran Monday meetings like a general and never once let anyone see her sweat. But right now, her seat was pushed back. Her heels were on the dashboard, and her face was turned away from the window like she was hiding from something she couldn't name. Marcus stood very still. He told himself to keep walking, to mind his business, to remember who she was and who he was. But then he saw it. Her shoulders, they were shaking. And just like that, every wall he had built around his own quiet grief recognized something familiar in hers. He walked to the window, he knocked, and when Diana Cho slowly turned to face him, eyes red, mascara gone, walls completely down, she opened her mouth and said 4 words that changed everything. "Please don't tell anyone." Marcus did not move. He stood there in the cold, his knuckles still warm from the knock, staring at a woman he had never truly seen before. Not like this. Diana Cho was always composed, always sharp, always the person in the room who made other people feel like they needed to try harder just by walking in. But the woman behind this window was none of those things. She was just tired, the kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. She cracked the window open an inch, just enough for her voice to slip through. "I said, don't tell anyone." Marcus exhaled slowly. "I heard you. Then why are you still standing there?" He didn't have a good answer for that, so he asked a question instead. "How long have you been out here?" She looked away. That was answer enough. Marcus glanced around the empty lot. No other cars, no lights on in the building. Just the two of them in a silence so thick it felt like a third person standing between them. "Diana?" He said her name carefully, like it was fragile. "It's 2 a.m. and it's 40 degrees. I'm aware of the temperature, Marcus. Even now, even like this." She was still trying to be in charge of something. He almost smiled. Almost. "Can you at least tell me what's going on?" She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that he thought she was going to shut the window and pretend this never happened. But then she spoke. "You know about the divorce." It wasn't a question. Everyone at Harlow had heard something. Whispers in the break room, a missing ring, fewer lunch plans. The kind of absence that people notice but never mention out loud. "I heard something," Marcus said carefully. "The board doesn't know the full story." Her voice was steady but thin, like a wire pulled too tight. "They think it was mutual, amicable, handled quietly like adults. And it wasn't?" She laughed. "But there was nothing warm in it. He took the house, Marcus. My name was on that mortgage for 6 years and he took it in the settlement because his lawyer was better than mine." She stopped, swallowed. "I've been looking for a place for 3 weeks. Every option I find, there's a reporter or someone connected to the board who will see me and talk." Marcus was quiet. He was starting to understand. Diana Cho was not just a woman going through a divorce. She was a woman trying to survive one without letting the sharks smell blood in the water. The board already questions whether a woman my age can lead this company through the merger. Her jaw tightened. "If they find out I'm sleeping in my car because I can't even hold my personal life together." She stopped herself, but Marcus had already heard everything she didn't finish saying. This was not just embarrassment. This was survival. One wrong headline, one board member's raised eyebrow, one moment of visible weakness in the wrong room, and everything she had spent 15 years building could come apart in a single afternoon. He understood that kind of fear. Not in boardrooms, not in mergers, but in the specific suffocating way that comes from being the only person standing between a child and the world falling apart. He had felt that every single day since his wife died. Marcus stepped back from the car. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked up at the flat dark sky for just a moment like he was asking someone up there for permission. Then he looked back at her. "I have a couch," he said quietly. "It's not much. My daughter decorated it with stickers she shouldn't have had access to. But it's warm." Diana stared at him, like the word warm was something she had forgotten the meaning of. "Marcus, one night," he said. "No one has to know anything. If you've ever felt like you were holding everything together with nothing left, you already know exactly how she felt in that moment. Drop a comment below. We see you one night. That was the agreement. Sybil. Clean. Easy to explain if anyone ever asked. Marcus drove ahead and Diana followed in her car through streets that were quiet enough to feel like the whole city was minding its own business, which was exactly what they needed. His apartment was small, the kind of small that tells you everything about a person's priorities. There were crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, a pair of tiny rain boots by the front door, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table with a sticky note that said, "Do not touch." Lily. Diana stood in the doorway and looked at all of it, and for just a second, something crossed her face that wasn't exhaustion. It was something quieter than that. Something closer to longing. "She's 6, Marcus said softly, nodding toward the hallway where his daughter was sleeping. "She will absolutely talk to you like she's known you her whole life. Fair warning." Diana almost smiled. "I'll manage." He set up the couch with a blanket that smelled like fabric softener and left a glass of water on the table beside it. No big gestures. No conversation that went too deep, just simple. Quiet kindness offered without condition. She sat down on the edge of the couch and looked at the sticker-covered cushion beside her. A small purple unicorn. A glittery star. A crooked heart that had clearly been placed by very determined little fingers. "She has good taste," Diana said. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "She has confidence. There's a difference." This time Diana did smile. And it was nothing like the smile she wore in the office. That one was polished. Practiced. Built for rooms full of people who were always watching. This one was real. He turned off the light and said goodnight. One night became 2. 2 became 5. It was never dramatic. There was no moment where they sat down and decided to extend the arrangement. It just kept being easier to stay than to find somewhere else to go. The apartment was small, but it never felt crowded. Diana was gone before Lily woke up each morning and back after dark each evening. She ate whatever Marcus left covered on the stove and left the kitchen cleaner than she found it. But Lily noticed anyway. Children always do. On the 4th morning, Lily padded out in her socks and found Diana sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of files she had brought from the office. Lily stared at her for a long moment. Diana stared back. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Lily asked. Diana glanced toward the hallway. Marcus was not there yet. She was on her own. "I'm his colleague," Diana said carefully. Lily considered this with the deep seriousness that only a 6-year-old can bring to a Tuesday morning. "That's a big word. It means we work together." "Oh." Lily climbed into the chair across from her. "Do you want to see my puzzle?" And just like that, Diana Cho, CEO, board survivor, woman who had negotiated $1-million contracts across mahogany tables, was sitting on the floor 10 minutes later, quietly searching for the edge pieces of a butterfly puzzle with a 6-year-old who had already decided they were friends. Marcus stood in the hallway and watched. He didn't say anything. But something shifted in his chest that he wasn't ready to name yet. Then the rumors started. Someone from the office saw Diana's car parked on his street 2 mornings in a row. A glance became a whisper. A whisper became a story. And stories at Harlow and Associates had a way of growing legs very quickly. By Friday, Marcus heard his own name said in a tone he didn't like. And by Friday evening, someone had already decided they knew exactly what was going on. If this story is pulling at something in your chest right now, hit that like button. You have no idea how much it helps us keep telling stories like this one. It started with small things. The kind of small things that are easy to dismiss in the daylight, but impossible to ignore at midnight. It started with the way Marcus always left the kitchen light on when he went to bed. Not because he forgot, but because he knew Diana came in late and he didn't want her walking into a dark apartment alone. She noticed. She never said anything. But she noticed. It started with the way Diana began leaving coffee ready in the mornings. Measured perfectly. The right amount of sugar without being asked. Because she had quietly paid attention to how he took it. He noticed too. These were not the actions of 2 people who were simply tolerating an arrangement. These were the quiet, careful gestures of 2 people who were starting to matter to each other. Whether they were ready to admit it or not, it was a Wednesday night when everything got closer than it should have. Lily had been put to bed an hour earlier. The apartment was settled into that particular silence that only exists after a child falls asleep. Soft and still and somehow safer than any other kind of quiet, Marcus was at the kitchen table going over bills he had been avoiding. Diana was on the couch with her laptop, preparing for a board presentation that was making her shoulders tense from across the room. She made a sound. Small. Frustrated, Marcus looked up. "Talk me through it," he said, just like that. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked at him over the top of her screen. "It's a board presentation. It's not really your area. I've watched you rehearse 3 of them from that couch." He leaned back in his chair. "I know more about the Harlow merger than most people in that building." She closed the laptop slowly, and then she talked, really talked, not the way she talked in meetings, where every word was calculated and every pause was strategic. She talked the way people do when they are finally in a room where they don't have to perform. She talked about the pressure, about the board member who had been quietly campaigning against her since January, about the way she sometimes stood in the elevator before a big meeting and had to remind herself that she had earned every single floor of that building. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, the apartment felt different, like something invisible had been set down between them. "You know what I think?" he said quietly. "Tell me. I think you've been so busy making sure no one sees you struggle that you forgot it's okay to struggle." Diana looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her eyes that she was clearly trying to keep in place. A door she was deciding whether or not to open. "That's very easy to say," she said softly. "I know." His voice was just as soft. "I said it to myself for 2 years after my wife died before I actually believed it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, completely full of everything neither of them had said yet. She was close. The couch and the table were not far apart in a small apartment. And somehow, without either of them moving, the distance felt smaller than it had ever been. His eyes stayed on hers 1 second longer than they should have. She looked away first. But slowly the next morning everything shattered. Marcus was getting Lily ready for school when his phone buzzed. A message from a coworker. No greeting, no context. Just a name, Raymond Holt, senior board advisor. The same man Diana had described the night before, as the one quietly campaigning against her. The message read, "Saw your boss leaving your building this morning." Interesting. I think the board would find that very interesting too. Marcus stared at the screen. His stomach dropped completely, because Raymond Holt was not the kind of man who sent warnings out of kindness. He was the kind of man who collected information and waited for exactly the right moment to use it. And that moment, Marcus realized, was coming very soon. Are you feeling the tension right now? Because we are. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. This story is just getting started. Monday came like a verdict. Marcus felt it the moment he walked through the glass doors of Harlow and Associates, the kind of feeling that has no single source but lives in everything around you. In the way conversations paused a half-second too long when he passed. In the way eyes moved toward him and then quickly away. In the way the break room went just slightly quieter when he walked in to pour his coffee. He had felt invisible in this building for 3 years. Now he felt the opposite of that. And it was so much worse. By 10 o'clock, the whisper had a shape. People were saying Marcus had been getting close to Diana on purpose. That the late nights, the private conversations, the fact that she had been seen leaving his building, all of it was calculated. A junior employee positioning himself beside the most powerful person in the company to secure his own future. They made it sound almost impressive. But the word they kept using behind closed doors was not impressive. It was manipulative. Marcus sat at his desk and stared at his screen and said nothing. Because there was nothing he could say that would not make it worse. Any denial would sound like guilt dressed up in better clothes. He just worked. Quietly. Carefully. And waited. Deanna called a department meeting at noon. She walked in the way she always walked in. Shoulders back, expression neutral. The kind of compose that takes years of practice to make look effortless. She stood at the head of the table and spoke about the merger timeline and third-quarter projections, and nobody in that room would have guessed that anything in her world was anything other than perfectly ordered. Marcus sat 3 seats down and did not look at her directly. She did not look at him either. But he noticed the moment her eyes almost moved in his direction and then corrected themselves. A fraction of a second. Invisible to everyone else in the room, visible to him, Raymond Holt requested a private meeting with the board at 2 o'clock. Marcus found out through the same coworker who had sent him the message. The details were thin, but the intention was clear. Raymond had framed the situation not as a personal matter, but as a question of professional judgment, of leadership integrity, of whether the CEO of Harlow and Associates was capable of maintaining appropriate boundaries during the most critical business period the company had seen in a decade. He had not used anyone's name yet. But the implications sat in that boardroom like smoke. At 4 o'clock, Diana's assistant appeared at Marcus's desk. "She wants to see you." Her office felt different when it was just the two of them, bigger somehow. The city stretched wide and gray behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Diana stood with her back to him for just a moment before she turned around. She looked like herself again. The office version. Armor fully in place. That scared him more than anything else. "I need to get ahead of this," she said. Her voice was calm and flat and carefully emptied of everything personal. "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "I'm going to tell HR that you were helping me with confidential merger documents off-site. That explains the early mornings at your building. It keeps everything professional." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "And us?" he asked. The word "us" surprised him as it came out. Like it had been waiting longer than he realized, something moved across her face, quick and painful and gone before it fully arrived. "There is no us, Marcus." Her voice did not waver. "There is a CEO and an employee and a situation that needs to be managed before it costs both of us everything." He nodded once. He picked up his bag. And he walked out of her office feeling something he had not felt since the early days of grief. Like he had just lost something he never even got the chance to properly have. If your heart just sank a little, ours did too. Drop a comment and tell us whose side you're on right now. We want to know. 3 days. That was how long the silence lasted. 3 days of passing each other in hallways with the careful distance of two people who had silently agreed to pretend. 3 days of Marcus answering emails and sitting in meetings and picking Lily up from school and cooking dinner and doing every ordinary thing that ordinary life required, while carrying something heavy and unnamed in the center of his chest. Lily noticed on the second day. She didn't ask directly. She was 6, not oblivious. Instead, she climbed into his lap after dinner and pressed her small hand against his cheek and said, "Daddy, you look like you lost something." He hugged her tighter than he meant to. "I'm okay, Bug." She didn't argue, but she watched him for the rest of the evening with those careful eyes that children use when they know an adult is lying, but love them too much to say so. At Harlow, Diana's plan had worked. The HR explanation was clean and professional, and Raymond Holt had nothing solid enough to push further without exposing his own agenda. The board meeting had ended without escalation. The merger timeline was back on track. Everything at Harlow and Associates looked exactly the way Diana Cho needed it to look: controlled, stable, unbothered. But Marcus knew better now. He knew what her real face looked like at 2 a.m. in a cold parking lot. He knew how she took her coffee. He knew she searched for edge pieces first when she did puzzles with Lily. He knew she rehearsed difficult conversations in a whisper when she thought no one could hear her. He knew her in the way that mattered. And she had looked him in the eye and said there is no us, so he let it go. Or he tried to. On Thursday evening he was washing dishes when someone knocked on his door. He dried his hands slowly. Told himself it was probably his neighbor about the parking situation again. Told himself to breathe like a normal person. Opened the door. Deanna stood in the hallway, not in her work clothes, not in her armor, jeans, a dark coat, her hair down in a way he had only seen once before, that first night on his couch. She looked smaller without the office around her, more real, more terrifying. "Lily's asleep," he said, because he needed to say something. "I know. I waited." She looked at him steadily. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. She walked in and stood in the middle of the living room and looked at the sticker-covered couch and the crayon drawings and the half-finished butterfly puzzle that Lily had finally allowed someone to touch again. She looked at all of it like she was memorizing something she was afraid of losing. Then she turned to face him. "I handled it wrong," she said, Marcus leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. Not in anger, in self-protection. You handled it the way made sense for your position. I handled it like a coward. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, just slightly, but he heard it. I sat in that office and looked at you and chose the safest version of the truth because I was scared. And I sent you out of that door carrying something I put there, and I have spent 3 days trying to convince myself it was the right call. Was it? He asked quietly. She shook her head, and then she said the thing she had been holding since that first cold night in the parking lot. I think I stayed, Marcus. Her eyes were completely open now. No performance, no management. Just her. I think after the first night I stayed because of you. Not because I had nowhere to go. Because being here felt like the first place in a very long time where I didn't have to be anything other than exactly what I am. The apartment was completely still. Marcus uncrossed his arms. He took one step toward her. And then his phone buzzed on the counter behind him. He glanced at it without thinking. It was a news alert. 4 words on the screen that made his blood run completely cold. Deanna Cho resigns. Effective immediately, he looked up at her. She was already watching him. And she wasn't surprised. Which meant she already knew. Which meant tonight was not just an apology. Tonight was goodbye. Don't you dare close this tab. Subscribe right now and stay with us because what happens next will absolutely break you open in the best possible way. The word resign sat between them like something dropped from a great height. Marcus looked at his phone, then at her. Then at his phone again, like the screen might change if he gave it enough time. It didn't. Diana. I submitted it this afternoon. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. She pressed them together in front of her like she was trying to hold herself in one piece. Before I came here, you didn't have to do that. I know. The merger, the board, everything you've spent 15 years. I know, Marcus. She said it gently, not to stop him, just because she had already had this conversation with herself 100 times in the last 72 hours and she had already survived it. I know exactly what I walked away from. He was quiet. She took a slow breath. Raymond was going to keep pulling at this thread until something unraveled. And the thing he would have unraveled wasn't a scandal. It was you, your reputation, your job, your ability to provide for Lily. Her jaw tightened. I was not willing to let that happen. Something moved through Marcus that had no clean name. It was not gratitude exactly. It was bigger than that. It was the specific feeling of being protected by someone when you had spent so long being the only one doing the protecting. It cracked something open in him quietly and completely. You should have talked to me first, he said. If I had talked to you first, you would have told me not to do it. He opened his mouth, closed it, because she was absolutely right. They sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. No laptops, no files, no presentations to rehearse. Just 2 cups of coffee going slowly cold between them and a conversation that moved the way honest conversations do. Slowly at first and then all at once. She talked about what came next. Some consulting work she had already been approached about. A smaller firm, less pressure, less performance, more room to breathe. He talked about Lily. About how grief had taught him to hold things loosely, because holding too tight only made the losing harder. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, without either of them announcing it, they stopped talking about the future in separate terms. It just happened, the way real things do. 3 weeks later, Diana found an apartment. It was 4 blocks from Marcus's building, close enough to walk, far enough to be her own. She painted the living room a deep, quiet green, and bought a coffee maker that made better coffee than she probably needed, and put exactly nothing on the walls for the first week, because she wanted to decide slowly what deserved that kind of permanence. Lily helped her pick a print for the hallway. A butterfly, obviously. There was no dramatic declaration, no moment designed for an audience. There was just a Saturday afternoon when Marcus and Lily showed up at her door with groceries and a puzzle Lily had personally selected, and Diana opened the door and felt something she had forgotten was available to her. She felt like she was expected, not needed, not managed, not evaluated, just expected in the warm, simple way that means someone has made space for you in their ordinary life, and they are not asking you to be anything other than what you already are. Marcus stood in her doorway and looked at her the way he had looked at her that first night in the parking lot. Like he had recognized something, like something in him had known before the rest of him caught up. "You gonna let us in?" he said quietly. Deanna stepped back and opened the door wider, and Lily walked straight in like she owned the place, which, honestly, she kind of did. Some things don't begin with grand gestures. Some things begin with a knock on a cold window at 2 a.m., with a couch covered in stickers, with coffee made the right way without being asked, with someone choosing your safety over their own comfort and calling it an easy decision. Some things begin with two people who were both trying so hard to hold everything together that they forgot they didn't have to do it alone. This was one of those things. And it was just getting started. If this story touched something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us what moment got you the most. And if you're new here, subscribe and come home to more stories that remind you that the most extraordinary things almost always begin in the quietest, most unexpected moments. We'll see you in the next one.